Okay, good afternoon, everyone. People are trickling in. Welcome. This is another one of our Lyngso Wednesday classes. Sort of a slightly different format than our regular classes. No PowerPoint today. It'll be sort of a hands-on class, and Arnie will be physically pruning the trees, and you'll see me move the camera around and follow him around. If you have any questions, you go ahead and type that in the chat, and I'll try to monitor as much as I can. And this class is also being recorded, so I'll go ahead and email and post the class on our website for your access as well. Anything else? I think that's pretty much it. I think we can get started, Arnie.
Well, that's great. Well,
let me move the speaker here so you can, got wires everywhere. Yeah, there we go.
Good afternoon, especially good afternoon to Melbourne, Australia. You're closer to my great-granddaughter than I am, so I might visit you on my way there if you send me your address. I'd like to welcome you all to Lyngso's educational program. I'm really proud of what they do, the way they try to share how not to do things, materials available. Today, primarily, it's how not to do things. Hopefully, you'll walk away from today's session a little more confident in pruning because they've yet to come up with super glue to put that branch back on that the garden whacked off. Your favorite branch. Most important thing with respect to pruning is the right tools. So why don't we take a few moments and go through the right tools. The gardening industry has set record highs on sales because everybody is working from home and interested in their garden to a point where even Martha Stewart puts out her pruners. So if you are a loyal Martha Stewart fan, I got these from Home Depot, but that's not my favorite. My favorite brand is the ARS brand of tools made in Japan. And most important thing about pruning is pruning with clean, sharp, sterile tools. For example, what do I mean by a sharp tool? I do the 99 US cent test. I take a dollar bill and snip a corner off. That means my tool is not only sharp, but looking at the sun, there's no light coming through. One of the things that I noticed in Ikebana is they teach something which is opposite to what I believe. When they cut heavy branches, they don't cut and rotate to complete the cut. They cut and wiggle back and forth. It ends up bending the blades, and you never get a clean cut. Remember, the cleaner the tool, the sharper the tool, the faster the wound will heal. So these are for pruning. They're bypass. By that I mean one blade passes the other. The other type of pruning tool is the anvil, where the blade comes down to a V. And these are great for pruning roses, the first or second pruning. But when you get to the third pruning, I prefer that you do this. Switch over to your bypass pruners. So before we get going, I'm going to demo clean my tools. What I usually do is get off the sticky icky that might be residing there from my previous job. The metal will discolor. I don't think it'll ever get shiny again, but that doesn't mean the tool is dirty. And then to sterilize it, there are many ways of doing it. One way of doing it is using Lysol, which kills 99.9% of all living creatures, including viruses, bacteria, and so forth. Now, the disadvantage of this is if you prune with a tool that's still wet with Lysol, you're killing the cells at the point where you cut. So if you don't want to do that, then you can sterilize using rubbing alcohol. Bought this at the local pharmacy. If you're going to buy it, get your money's worth. It's the same price. This is 91%, comes in 91, 70, 60, and so forth. The advantage of using this is once it has sterilized by evaporation and drying your tool, when you prune, you're not killing anything. You've killed whatever diseases might be on your tools, but you're not killing what you're pruning. So for close-in work, these are the two tools for pruning. For close-in branch removal, the smaller the branch, the finer the TPI, the tips per inch. This is one I buy at a carpentry shop. And when you compare the blades, I don't know if you can see the difference. How many more blades one has.
I can just zoom in, Arnie.
There we go. I don't think you can see it that well. There's some things you have to take my word for.
Yeah.
Anyhow, those are the ground tools. I don't want you working on your tall trees using painter's ladders. So what I suggest you use are extension tools. This is a ARS brand extension telescoping pruner. Look how I avoided going up on the ladder. If you need to go up on the ladder, you have your choice. You can buy an orchard ladder, which is safe, or you could fall off your painter's ladder and go to the ER. Those are the two choices you have. I prefer you guys use an orchard ladder. Here's an example. I can go over here. Prune. Hey, I left a stub, didn't I? I did that on purpose. I'll show you why I left a stub. Can we see this over here?
Yeah.
Next year, that stub will have dried off. Next year, that stub will have dried off. Mother Nature has given you a pair of pruners in your hands. And look at this. You can just snap it off. So look, you've gone 1 year without having to climb the ladder. And again, here's another one. This is a little heavier one. Let's take this little tiny one, snap it off. Those of you that might be interested in acquiring another tool, this is a concave cutter used in bonsai. And this enables me to get much closer to the stub to prune it off. like that. Concave, C-O-N-C-A-V-E. They cost about $100 US. So why are we doing all of this? You're either pruning for aesthetics, for cosmetic reasons, or you're pruning because of the Ds. What do I mean by the Ds? You prune because a branch is dead. That's obvious. It's dead. You want to take it off. You prune a diseased plant. Why? Because if you don't cut it off and stop, it will travel and get deeper and deeper into the plant and may eventually kill the whole plant. Dying. What is the branch? Why is the branch dying? You need to do a little IPM to determine whether it's dying because of perhaps a lack of photosynthesis, or perhaps it is also diseased. One reason I distinguish between dying and diseased is you need to take a sample. I'm looking for something that I can use as a sample. When you cut away something that's dead, died, or diseased, I think it's really important for you to do a diagonal cut on the branch. That way you can see more of the rings and look at the color. This was healthy, so this will be green. If you see black rings or brown rings, it's worthy of determining whether the plant or the branch is diseased. So don't just throw it in the trash. If it's diseased, it should go in garbage. If it's truly dead, it could go into your recycle bin. So we talked about dead, dying, and disease. The next D is what I call dysfunctional. It would be a branch that doesn't belong, or a branch that's going the wrong way. Let me take this up here. This particular plant, you probably don't recognize. It's pretty ugly in the wintertime. It's a vine maple. It's not an Asapromatum. It's not a Japanese maple. It's a vine maple. It's not deer resistant, where a Japanese maple is. And one advantage is if you lose a Japanese maple or plan to verticillium wilt, which most of you vegetable gardeners are familiar with, it causes your almost instant death of your tomato plants. If you have verticillium wilt, this plant will survive in verticillium wilt. If you want a list of plants that will survive in verticillium wilt, go to the UC, University of California, Davis website, and they have a list of verticillium wilt on disease-resistant plants. So going down the Ds, I guess this one here is obviously dead. It was broken. I'll take that off. This will grow to about 6 feet high and 6 feet wide. If you remove the lower branches, because the lower branches are sapping off energy. So what I would probably do is eliminate some of the lower branches that are really nothing to encourage upward growth. I would call the next D dysfunctional. What do I mean by dysfunctional? Something that's just coming around, wrapping itself around it. It looks kind of silly. But you could cut it to a point where it could branch out nicely. You could do that. This plant has been in the pot for a long time. And I think it may be root bound. So bound is part of pruning. When you have a plant that's in a pot for a long time, it will consume most of the organic matter. Eventually, there'll be no organic matter. And then you wonder why the plant gets weak and the plant dies. One of the tricks in bonsai is to starve a plant intentionally to keep it small. So if that's your intent, to keep it small, then starve it, feed it very lightly, but still you're going to have roots that circumnavigate and go round and round and round. And eventually there won't even be anything left but sand in the pot. So one of the things that I'd like to do is make this look pretty. The only way that it looks pretty is if I aim it that way to the camera. But it's not a balanced plant. So I haven't tried this yet, but let me see if I can get this out. No. So here's what you do. Especially if it's in a terracotta, pot, it actually grows into the pot. So the way to get it out seems rather brutal, but it works. This is a DeWalt reciprocating saw, and it has a pruning blade in it. And what I do is I go around the edge. As a reminder, what we're going to do is root pruning, okay? It'd be easy to put it down. There we are. It's still an ugly plant, but while we have it out, why don't we do a little root pruning? So what I do is I take my claw and I break it up. And then take my pruners, and what I'm doing is cutting away. You can even tear it away. What I'm doing is I'm tearing away most of the hair roots. And the hair roots are the roots that feed the tree. It's not the big roots, it's the hair roots. This one hasn't been in as long as I thought and doesn't have a lot of excess roots. But the trick to do what I wanted to achieve is to put it back in the pot. straight up and down. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is to lean it. And of course, imagine this is a bag of nice, fresh potting mix. Not planting mix. There's a potting mix and there's a planting mix. And what's the difference? The potting mix is more porous, which means it drains, doesn't hold the water. And if you use planting mix for this application, you would probably get decay. So tell me it doesn't look better. I can't hear you. Looks better. All right. A little more pruning.
So would you recommend this, Arnie, for any plant that is sort of lopsided or leaning towards one side and it's planted in a pot?
I recommend that you plant it straight, but Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate. So putting that aside, your potting soil that you potted the plant in is not indefinite. It gets consumed. So you take your plant out on a cool day. By the way, those of you that are shivering and have the heat on, it's currently 69 degrees here in San Carlos, California. Eat your heart out. So here is a piece of jute that was used to hold this and provide more verticality. If you forget about it, it will decay. We have last year's, maybe 2 years ago, stub sitting there. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is, hiding in plain sight. We'll clean it up. Okay. Now, I would call this dysfunctional. It's going the wrong way. So how do we remedy it? Well, we have to start over again. This is a right-left pair. So I'm going to prune them above the right-left pair and favor the new branch that'll come out that way. This is going totally the wrong way, but if I remove too much, you don't have enough leaves for photosynthesis. This top is really ugly. How do you think that happened? It's almost a U shape. If you prune young V's too close while they're still growing, you'll tend to get a U or that funny shape. We need to remedy that. That'll never look good. I'm pruning for how this tree will look 2-3 years from now, not tomorrow. You have to plan ahead. So I want some verticality. I'm going to leave that one. This is a right-left, that's an up-down. I'd like a right-left. So either you live with this ugly, or you just set it back and start over again. And that is about what I would do. I wonder if you all understand what I mean when I say right, left. But if you look at the branch, you'll notice the buds are right, left. And on this tree, they go up, down. And they go right, left again. And then they go up, down. So you can control directionality. If I prune this here, I will eventually have that. up, down branch. If I prune here, of course, I'll get 2 leaves and they'll turn into 2 branches and they will turn into that. So you can control directionality by where you prune the particular stubs that you leave. Just so we're not too disproportionate, I'd like to bring this down to that side. And there's an example of root pruning. Root pruning is done on a cool morning in the shade. And after you root prune, you should really leave the plant in low sun level for a year to let it adjust. So that is root pruning.
And Arnie, how often do you recommend root pruning?
If you want to keep a plant small, there are 2 ways to control the potted plant. You could start it, give it minimum food, and it'll tell you that by the nature of its lack of growth or the leaves being distorted, or you can root prune. So it just, you saw how easy root pruning is, at least when I do it. It's very messy, but fortunately I don't have to clean up. So I would root prune and keep something in the pot a certain size. I would do it maybe every 3 years. I hope that answers your question. Slow down the growth by not feeding it so much. Stop giving it nitrogen. Nitrogen makes it grow. Have you ever heard of putting down a 0.55 fertilizer? Yeah, that would work. Okay, someone asked a question about pruning, the differences between trees and shrubs. I use an example of Horticarpus, Camellia, Rhodes, azaleas. What I find interesting is gardeners, when they prune their hedges, prune them straight down. So what do you think happens when you prune something straight down? The bottom branches are not getting sun and they're dying off. And eventually you have a long stick and a little hedge on top. Greatly exaggerating when you prune hedges, you should prune them that way. So the outward lower branches are getting some sun, but if you prune them like this, they're not getting anything and they'll die off. And the same is true on an espalier over here. This is a lemon espalier. And if you look at it,
It's quite heavy, so let me move you
I
there.
just want to rotate it sideways.
Which way are you trying to go?
Okay,
I think
so
this is the front.
this is the viewing angle of an espalier, a lemon espalier they have here in the yard. And it is, in terms of pruning, analogous to hedges. This lower branch should extend out further than the upper branches. It should be pruned this way, not like this way. So since it's a lemon and lemons bear fruit twice a year, if you can see, this is ready to flower. And while it is flowering, although this was outside, it still has 3 lemons on it. You wouldn't want to prune it now. If you prune it now, and this applies to fruit trees as well, if they're ready to be flowering, you're not going to prune away the flowers, you don't get any fruit. So getting back to the question, for azaleas, camellias, and rhododendrons, I prune them after they flower and feed them after they flower. Because for some reason, it takes that long for the fertilizer to work into the plant. On citrus such as this, I would prune it twice a year per directions on the box divided by 2. I'm not going to be popular with the fertilizer manufacturers, but I think their objective is to sell as much fertilizer as they can. And I would rather you just put half, whatever they recommend, down on wet soil, and then maybe another 30, 45 days later, put down the other half dose. If you hit it all at once, you get a sudden spurt of nitrogen-induced growth. Now, trees talk to you. Whether you realize it or not, trees have all 5 senses. That they don't have mobility, but they can hear. Trees can hear water and will travel its roots to a source of water. Trees can feel pain. However, their pain gets transmitted inches per minute through the root system to other plants, warning it that it's under attack. It can see, as you all know, sunflowers can follow the sun. It has defense mechanisms. It can secrete hormones to discourage insects when it's under attack. Trees survived the Earth's 5th extinction. And we've only been around tens of thousands of years. So I think you need to give more credit to trees, more respect for the elderly. This tree is an interesting example that tells you a lot of things. So what's the first thing you think about when you have a yellow leaf? It's not a lawn. You don't go buy 40 nitrogen and sprinkle it on it to yellow it up like your lawn. They're different messages that a tree will give you. I'm aesthetically pruning it.
Arnie,
Brutally.
could we turn this way, you think?
Well, I was going to show the leaves.
Okay.
Yeah, turn it
Because I think
any way
it's hard
you
for
want to.
folks to see
Okay.
the actual espalier.
Leaves talk to you. They can't speak with words, but they speak with their leaves. If you see a leaf bent like this, it probably says, "I'm thirsty." If you see yellow, partially yellow, it could mean a certain mineral deficiency. These have different yellow patterns. If you hunt on Google hard enough and go to citrus diseases, you'll find examples of different mineral deficiencies that citrus gets, and based on that, you could determine how to feed the citrus tree. It would never hurt to get an organic, all-purpose citrus fertilizer, just as we take a 1-a-day all-purpose vitamin. The tree will only take in what it needs and just let the excess or whatever you put in flush out through the bottom of the pot. So we talked about dead, dying, disease, dysfunctional. The other D is duplicate, redundant. When you have 2 branches going in the same direction, either side by side or up and down. Of course, they're going to divide any energy that's sent out, and that will shorten their length, but aesthetically, it's not very attractive. So, as an example of that, let me see if I get this. I'm not here. This is an Asa palmatum, and I haven't seen one like this for a while. I forget what the heck it is. I think it's, I'll give it to Cam and she can read it. Is it Leanne?
Irian.
It's an Irian.
Yeah.
I haven't seen an Irian for a long time. People that are Japanese tree lovers that have many in their yard look at the red and they automatically think it's a coral bark, sangokaku. But this is not, it's an Irian. So here's an example of you have redundancy. With that, you have duplication of branches. You have two going in the same direction, which I don't like. We have two leaders. These are the main leaders. Okay. So everything should be basically establishing two trees on these two leaders. So when you go to the nursery, I'll get a tag. I can read this one. So Ilarian, I-L-A-R-I-A-N. When you go to the nursery and you're looking for a tree, most trees are grafted onto disease-resistant rootstock. Fruit trees, things in the Camellia rhodea azalea family. Citrus are definitely grafted. Apples and pears are grafted. So first of all, you want to look at the graft. Here is the graft. I know that's not part of the pruning lesson, but it's an important lesson to teach. If the graft is not close to perfect, you really don't want to buy the plant because it's an opening in which disease can enter, insects to enter. Other thing which I consider part of pruning is planting too low or too high. So this is really planted too low. How am I defining too low? At the bottom of your trunk, you have your root crown curve. You should be able to see that. And that should be kept dry. As you walk around the block and you see your neighbors decorating the base of their beautiful oak trees with river rock, holding the moisture down and rotting away this root crown, and then they wonder why the tree blows over in the wind. That could be the reason. So, of course, like a good neighbor, you're going to knock on the stranger's door and tell them to move the rocks, aren't you? Oh. It just bothers me when I see it. So, this is buried correctly now. It has a healthy graft. The scion matches the rootstock perfectly. The more lower branches you have, the more energy diversion gets dispersed on the lower branches, which means the shorter the tree will go. I believe this will go to maybe 20, 25 feet high and 20 feet wide in time. So you can slow its height down by leaving the lower branches. But the lower branches may eventually just die off because the upper branches become sun hogs. And they're taking away the sun, and the lower branches, since the tree nodes are not functioning as sugar makers, will just let them die off. So I digressed again. We were talking about one of the D's, duplicate branches, redundant branches. So I'd probably take this one off and simplify things. And now that I got this off, let's do this again. Camera on this. Right, left, buds, up, down, buds, right, left, buds. If I left this branch alone, you get a leaf going up and a leaf going down right here. But if I cut it here, next year, we'd have a branch coming up and a branch going down. If you wanted them to go the other direction, you cut it here, have a branch going right, a branch going left. Eventually, I should say, first you'd have it would leaf out. Now, if I cut it too close, like that, the tree would either think that these aren't worth saving, or I can't make them work, and that they would die off. Or you would end up not with a regular V shape like this. See that V shape? What should we do my magic pruning there? You would get a Y or a U by pruning it too close to those buds. You want to leave a stub. Now, the thing you should know, unless you're in the industry, the propagators do very little pruning on trees, except if there's frost damage, they'll cut it away. When it gets to the nursery also does very little pruning, because how do they know what shape the customer wants? So you may end up getting a very, very leggy, rough-looking tree, and may have to clean it up for the style that you like. Here's a dysfunctional situation. Can you see we got a branch going in? We don't want a branch going in. So I'm going to take it there, and we'll end up with two branches, one out and one in. At the very tippy top, we got a real, what I'll call a mess. Looks like a witch's broom, doesn't it? So you really have to make a decision on top what you want to do. Break the light fixture.
I think it's okay.
Okay. What I'd like to do is not let the top get so wild. I like to slow it down a little. So shorten that. Now, as I shorten, I'm going to go from lower to higher. And never cut them all the same length. Cut them at different lengths so they look irregular. Now, I have a horrible mixture of right, left, up, down, in, out. But what I've done is I've slowed it down. In California, you can prune probably until March for Japanese maples. I pruned one a couple of weeks ago that's in full-time sun, and it started to weep and bleed, so I stopped pruning it. I don't like this going in, so let's change the direction on that. So that's some of the ideas on those trees. One of the questions we had, the difference in pruning fruit trees versus deciduous, I guess deciduous fruit trees versus evergreen trees. Well, I think you have to decide what genre the trees are in. For example, an apricot and a cherry tree in this area, we prune it, or you should prune it after you pick the fruit, believe it or not. After you pick the fruit. If you prune it during the rainy season, the disease gets washed down into the open wounds, and it results in disease entering into the trees, phloem and xylem. I could play with this another half hour, but we don't have the time. So apples and pear trees, you can prune anytime, and you can prune up to 40%, and they'll laugh at you. And of course, you would never prune away the buds and the flowers. So pruning depends on plant dormancy and disease control. Apples and pears, we spoke about. Santa Rosa plums are one of the most vigorous stone fruit trees there are. So that's another one you could prune away 40% and it'll come back with vigor. Remember, when you prune, the tree doesn't know that you pruned it. It thinks the branch broke and it wants to do something. So assuming it broke right here, where I'm holding my two fingers, if you pruned it there, it would assume it had broken in the wind. Many, many dormant buds below it would activate and it would come out into what I call a witch's broom. So again, fruit trees you prune for fruit production or aesthetics. You can't really have both. If you prune it because it should look pretty in the center of your backyard, then you want to prune for aesthetics. If you're in an orchard, you want to prune for fruit production. If you're pruning stone fruit for fruit production, you prune it open vase like this. So let the sun get in and all the fruit gets sun and basically all kind of ripens at the same time. But if it was in your backyard, you're not really growing it for fruit, so you don't care if you pick one today and pick one tomorrow. Or on the sunny side, you get the sweetest, largest fruit. So you pick them at home when you want them. So when you prune fruit trees, depends on the fruit tree. And are you doing it for aesthetic purposes or production purposes? We had a question on espalier fruit trees. Well, this is it kind of in the dark. I don't know if you can see it that well. Maybe you want to turn the light on a little?
Yeah,
I'll
let's
sacrifice it.
Okay.
So here we have, and remember, as I said a little while ago, lemon trees are different than all the other citrus. Lemon trees fruit twice a year, while the other citrus only fruit once a year. So you can have flowers and fruit on your lemon tree at the same time. Lemon tree espaliers are not the theoretical ones where you have branches coming out and then beautiful apples and pears dangling, because it doesn't grow that way. We even have a branch that's green taped, going straight down and violating one of the rules of the road, and that is you never have two branches touching except on a dwarf espalier, a dwarf espalier, and even dissect them where the branches do this to protect themselves from the sun. But generally, you never have branches rubbing because they open up, they secrete a hormone, and they allow and attract disease and insects. So what we do on a tree like this is we weave it in and out, okay? On the other hand, we don't want this tendency to want to be big. So we'll take that branch off. I'd like to leave this as the top of my espalier. This one has a lot of flowers on, so I will sacrifice, but I can bring it up to this bare spot to allow more sun to come down. Now, I never use that ugly fluorescent green tape. I never use it because it's really not very pretty. So I use jute line, comes in many different sizes. This is a heavier one. It's a can I got around somewhere, if I brought it in. Yeah, here it is. This is black. So to control the shape of the branch, and so it doesn't flop around, and to continue the espalier theory of keeping things close to two-dimensional, I will just do a simple tie like this. A loose tie, because you don't want to girdle it if you forget it. On the other hand, this is jute, and that jute will decay. But that's not the branch I wanted. Nobody told me I was cutting the wrong branch. This is the branch I want to bring up to allow more sun to come down. Anybody has any So there's more specific questions like espalier. Why don't you chat them in while I'm working on this?
I think we had a couple other questions. Well, maybe there are questions coming in here. Let's see. So how far should you prune, say, an overgrown pomegranate espalier or not? I know we had one a couple of years ago. I actually took home and was really bushed out. And is there a trick to prune that down?
Well, again, with espaliers, they're very, very special purpose tree. You either put them against a very boring southern stucco wall where they get lots of heat, and with lots of heat, get nice, ripe, yummy fruit. So the more leaves you have, the more photosynthesis you have, and the more sugar and the better the fruit. What you can do is, if you have a leaf that just happens to be hanging in front of the fruit, you might want to cut that off so it gets sunshine.
Do you have any tips on how to saw off vertical stems on pears or cherries so that the handsaw doesn't bind?
Vertical, are you speaking of
Like old
water sprouts?
Old suckers.
Old suckers?
Yeah.
I wish I had something to demo with. This is going to be what you do, I think. Okay, let's throw and use your imagination. This is a tree, okay? This is a tree. And this is a dead branch. Why it died, we'll figure that out later. So if you took your saw and went in there to cut it out, you'd reach a point where the weight of this would pull down and carry the bark, and the bark would never heal, and you'd have a sick tree. So what is normally done, remember this is a tree, this weighs a couple 100 pounds. What is normally done is you first make a cut, 3 cuts like this. So what does that do? Oh, I went too far. Oops. That was only supposed to go, I didn't realize how sharp my tool was. This was a bark prevention cut. We just cut 1/3 of the bottom, okay? And then we take 50 pounds, another 50 pounds off, another 50 pounds. Then we take off, leave a little stub. And then we take our saw and we cut the residual stub off. But you never want to cut a branch flush. And the reason you never want to cut a branch flush is it won't heal The cells that heal the wound are located in the branch collar, right in there. So you want to cut it at maybe a 15-degree angle, like that. Again, I got the top one off. You notice I left a collar there. The cut, that was my cut. So does that answer that question?
I hope so.
I hope so. If not, we'll give you your money back.
So Arnie, going back to the root pruning, when you did, do you also compensate by pruning the top a little bit also when you're root pruning?
There's a limit as to how much of the poor tree you could shock. So you can't root prune and tree prune at the same time. If you're going to root prune, just leave the top of the tree alone, except removing anything dead, dying, or diseased.
Got it.
For aesthetic purposes, wait a year. Of course, the tree has to recover. Remember, we put in nice, new, fresh potting mix in there, and that's a new environment. It didn't have any nutrition to speak of before. So when's the best time to trim trees and bushes? Well, if it's dead, right away. If it's diseased, right away. And why? Sterilize your tool after you cut anything dead or diseased. Do a cross-section analysis of it. For example, on maples, the most common disease is the verticillium wilt. And that shows up as a black partial ring when you do your diagonal cut. But you can get brown rings and whatever. And decide what treatment you're going to give your diseased tree. So I just gave my peach tree its last copper spraying. That's part of pruning. If you don't want all the leaves to fall off of your peach tree, you need to spray it 3 times, generally on 3 holidays if you can't remember dates. The thing to be careful also of your plants that are in pots, since the potting soil is intended to drain very fast and not, you see that water meter? White?
I have not.
Oh, here it is. Because potting soil is very porous and the water goes through very fast, it washes the fertilizer down too, doesn't it? So when you're speaking of fertilizing potted plants, you probably have to do it more frequently. It's also important to know if you're overwatering and underwatering. And that's terrible. I'm going to fire me. It's reading 1 on a scale of 10. I borrowed this from Ladera Garden on Alpine Road in Portola Valley. I'm going to take it back and complain. Imagine that giving me a dry one. How about this right here? The one the vine maple, what do we have? Oh, that's good. 4 on the scale of 10. That one is great. This is a professional water meter. It's a lot better than the $20 ones you buy at Home Depot that keep breaking. And it has a calibration setting so you can calibrate it when necessary. And I've had this for about 10 years. They come in this length, and I think you can get them a foot deeper. And that's the way you really should check your large fruit trees to see if they're being watered adequately. Who cares what's happening in the top 2-3 inches? What really is important is what's down below. See, wow, what a difference.
Arnie, couple questions of root pruning. Can you root prune roses? And can you root prune them if they've been in the pot for a couple of years and it's not doing so great? And then what time can you prune it? Is it in December, fall, spring?
Generally, when you buy a rose at the nursery, what you're buying is something that's been repruned and put in some kind of sawdust or some kind of mix. So it is already root pruned.
What about established rose vines in a pot?
In a pot, I'd like to defer that to people who are experts on roses, but a plant is a plant is a plant, and the longer any plant is confined in a pot, eventually it's going to consume all the nutrients in the pot, and since the roots can't go out, they circumnavigate and go round and round. So regardless of what the plant is, I would root prune a rose. And if any rosarians out there disagree with me, I would like to know, so let me know. Okay.
And a couple things on the whiteboard, Arnie. People want to know if you can draw that 15-degree cut that you were talking about. And
Okay.
then
Which board do you want to work on?
that one would be good. I can zoom in on that.
This one?
Yeah, I'll move this.
Okay.
And then also the brand of the water meter that you were using.
You can buy it on the internet. I'm not giving a plug, because you can also buy it from E.
We can just write it on the board too. I'll just zoom in there.
It's Hatsalon, it's the, it looks like Rio Temp.
Yeah, I'll look at it.
Rio Temp, is that what it is?
I'll put it in the chat here for them. Yeah, Rio.
So, in the fictitious world, you've got the trunk coming down like this. And the ideal soil level is that. As the organic material gets consumed in the pot, you end up with this. And this is no good because this is very tender bark and vulnerable to rot and decay. And many times, one example, I've had a very large Japanese maple totally decayed all the way around and it just died. So I'm looking for the magic eraser.
It's right there, the yellow one. Yeah.
Okay, so that was one point I was making. The other point is to scale. Come on. Okay, this is above the ground. This is not the ground, this is a chunk. Your insurance company called and said, we're canceling your insurance because your branch is too close to your roof and your house is considered a fire hazard and we don't wish to insure you any further. Isn't that a lovely note to get? So what do we have to do? This branch is going out 15, 20, 30 feet over your house. Great summer shade, but do you want your house insured or not? And you can't argue with them because they're right. If the fire department came over, they would agree because let's say this is a eucalyptus, which is nothing but a package of oil. So we have to get rid of it. What you don't do is get your chainsaw and do that. That's a no-no. And the reason you don't do that is obviously the weight comes out and it's going to smash your roof, but forget that. This is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And as you cut through, it'll start leaning over and bending and it'll tear the bark. And this area will never heal. So how do you avoid that? The same way one eats an elephant, a small bite at a time. So what you need to do, and to emphasize it, I'll use a different color. This is what you have. Here's the 3-cut method. You put a safety cut right here. Go in about 1/4 of the way into the bark. That's your safety cut. Okay, you made your bark safety cut. Next, you need to get rid of the weight. So you start safely cutting pieces off. And then you finally make your last weight reduction cut there. So this little thing right here doesn't weigh that much. Then I'm using a chainsaw. Don't use a chainsaw on this cut because a chainsaw makes a very rough cut. The rougher the cut, the longer it takes to heal, if it heals at all. You want a nice, smooth cut. And I use my reciprocal saw that I use to do the root pruning. I use this. And you don't mind if I cut the board, do you? So we take these down and we have just a short little piece right there. So the final cut is out a little and halfway down root collar. This is, the branch collar. This is the branch collar. Halfway down the branch collar. Why? This area right in here has the healing cells. And if you walk around and look at old trees, you notice that a branch was cut and you see this donut like that, where the donut is trying to encapsulate the cut. That all started right here at the bottom half of the branch collar. I hope that explains what I was trying to demonstrate.
Okay, couple more things while you're near the whiteboard there. Or could you demonstrate or draw the up, down, right, left technique that you had shown while pruning?
Sure.
I think there was one more question.
Well, no. I'm taking off redundant branch. When you have a very narrow bee like that, guess what happens years from now when the branches are laden with wet leaves in a heavy windstorm? It breaks. The wider the crotch, the safer it is. So that's really not very safe. So wanted to discourage it. But aesthetically, I'm going to take this one off. Now, how do we get a good close-up, man, of the right, left, up, down?
I think it'd be better if you're here, Arnie, next to the whiteboard there. I can zoom in there.
Okay.
So they can see the color and the difference. You can use the whiteboard against.
Okay. If you go out, you find some plants have a pair of branches, and then you go up. What's the Greek letter? O with the I in it. The next pair of branches does this. And then you go up further, and the next pair of branches does that. And then next pair of branches goes like that. Well, the branch I'm talking about is sticking out. So what I meant by right, left is your branch has a right leaf and a left leaf. And come fall, deciduous, it dies and falls off. But underneath that leaf, petiole, is a bud, and you get two new branches come out where those leaves were. So that's what I meant by controlling the right and the left. So if this was your walkway, you certainly would not want to encourage branches going that way. So you would favor up, down. But out here, you don't have much choice. You have right, left. So you could keep them short and then go up, down. I hope that answers your question. Right, left, up, down. It's determined by the buds on the branch. Now, not all of them have opposite right, lefts. Some have left, and then the next one's right, the next one's left. But again, you should be able to control it.
Okay, thank you.
If that didn't answer your question, then let us know and I'll figure out another way of doing it. How are we doing on time?
We're good. We've got about 40 more minutes.
Okay. What's next on the question list? When is the best time of year to prune? Whoever said this only gave me two choices, spring or fall. Wrong. Best time of year to prune is a function of the Ds. So if you want to include dead, dying, and disease, and you want to address strictly pruning for aesthetic or fruit purposes, then that's a great question. So you certainly don't want to prune in the spring when your buds are breaking and flowering on your fruit tree. Otherwise, you're cutting away your fruit. So if we're referring to apples, pears, and that family, I would rather do heavy pruning in the winter time. In the fall, you could probably prune after you pick most of your fruit, if you want to prune in the fall. You know, it's a great question, but there's a different answer from most fruit trees. When you say best, if it's in your back, you know, this is what bothers me. The tree is in your backyard. You're so bored working on your computer. The boss is not there. He doesn't know what you're doing. So you could go out every afternoon and prune a little all year long and get away with it. So when to prune depends on the tree. General rule is if it weeps when you cut a branch, stop. That was a question. When you cut, do you seal? We used to paint our cuts with a sealant. And you could still buy it, not only in brush, but in spray form, because some people are old school. But the University of California at Davis did a test of sealing big wounds and leaving them unsealed, and they found no difference. And the likely reason is if you don't seal it, you're not sealing in any bacteria or disease that may have been on your pruner. If you let it bleed and do the equivalent of coagulate or harden, it's sealed off. And that's only been happening for 1.5 million years in nature. So why do we think we're smart enough to have to paint broken wounds? Of course, if you have a jagged wound, it'll never heal, and you should cut it down appropriately with a nice aesthetic cut so it looks good. One of the things about pruning is, as a professional pruner, I try to convince my clients that I'm pruning so it looks good 2 or 3 years from now. Except if my client is 95 years old, then it's perfect. So you want to become a better pruner. You cannot get it out of a book. You can get a lot. The only way you learn to prune is be an intern, go out with someone that's a better pruner than you are and can teach you the right way to prune, and watch and watch and learn and watch. I had a funny way of learning. When I thought I was smart enough, I went to one of our local nurseries and I asked if I could prune in the fall. And I got a funny look. And when I added for free, I got hired, but there was one proviso that if he didn't like the way I pruned, then I bought the tree. And I had, you know, I never bought a tree. So right then and there, I knew that pruning was for me. That was a fun experience.
I have a question here, Arnie. It says, why do they tell you to prune a bare root fruit tree to less than 3 feet?
We're talking, when you buy a brand new bare root fruit tree, what happened is this tractor with a sharp blade set about 2 feet underneath the ground, went straight across the entire orchard and cut all the trees. And then they took them out and they put them in a bag with some kind of fairly dormant planting mix, something that holds some moisture so it doesn't dehydrate. And you're taking it home and you're putting it in a totally new microclimate, different soil, different sun exposure. That's enough of a shock for any plant. So my preference is the first year, you don't prune it at all, except dead branches. The next year, and this is hard, you break the fruit off and throw it away. You don't grow fruit the second year because the tree is using so much energy to produce the fruit, and you'd rather it conserve its energy and build better soil soil roots and just be a stronger tree. And then when you have fruit the next year, this is really hard. You keep reading, you shouldn't have a piece of fruit more than every 6 inches or 8 inches. That's true, right? So my sequence is plant the fruit tree and plant it with a good planting mix. See, I'm not saying potting mix now. Plant it with a good rose planting mix. And it wouldn't hurt to throw in some starting fertilizer. You guys Sure Start, is that what you have here?
I have like BioLive or starter mix, the organic.
Yeah, throw in just a tad of starter fertilizer. And cut off, I showed you about root pruning. If there are long broken roots, they'll never heal. So with sterilized tools, cut the broken roots off. You shouldn't plant your new plant, whatever it is, whatever bare root it is with broken roots, because that's entry point for disease as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we had a question here. I want a Japanese maple espalier parallel to the fence. I saw them at a garden show. They were beautiful. They were Asapomaedum bloodgood, which have the dark burgundy colored leaves in full sun. And it was a true espalier, but it's more this kind of shape. The only time you get the traditional look like this is with generally with an apple or a pear. You can get a 4-on-1 or a 6-on-1. You can have 2 different, 4 different, 6 different types of apples or pears. But when you say espalier, it means 2-dimensional. But you can cheat. You can grow it as a semi-globe that way. If you truly don't want flat, you can have it half circle against a wall. And speaking of that, on hedges, do not let your mow, blow, and go guy take his electric edge pruner and go straight down. I hinted on this earlier, because all the lower branches will be blocked from the sun, it'll be dying off. Greatly exaggerating, have them prune that way. so your lower branches grow out far enough so they get some sun.
So actually, that was one of the questions, is if you're able to show the angle of pruning a hedgerow.
The taller the hedge, the wider the base.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a simple rule of thumb. But not every Japanese maple will lend itself to becoming an espalier, even though you're calling it flat against the fence. I would highly recommend a Bloodgood or an Emperor One. They both are hardy red leaves, but I don't know where you live. So nurseries in your area generally carry trees appropriate for your microclimate. So you really have to speak to your nurseryman or woman and tell them what you're trying to do, and they can recommend tree for your purpose. Remember, you have red leaf, burgundy colored leaves, green leaves, variegated leaves, Japanese maples as well. And with the Japanese maple, the color of the leaves is a function of the season. So why do you grow a Japanese maple? You either grow it for spring color of the leaves, summer color of the leaves, fall color of the leaves, or look at the beautiful winter color of the bark on this one. You have brown, there's variegated red brown. Would it be nice during the winter time looking out of your window in front of your sink and see something other than bare sticks? There's some color. If you like more color than that, then you use the coral box Hangokaku.
So going back to the pruning tools, could you recommend some pruners and tools that you like, the brands? I mean, this is definitely not a plug for those brands, but perhaps a couple different ones that you like.
Okay. Very good. Unless you enjoy taking aspirin for your sore back, here's a nice handy tool for picking up the cuttings. At the bottom and back a bit. The only place I've seen this is at online garden supply house called Gemplers, Gemplers, Gemplers. And you will not get a discount if you mention my name. Anyhow, look at that. There are many knockoffs of this, but if you're going to get a telescoping pruner, I recommend the ARS brand. There is also an ARS that's a cut and hold. In other words, you can cut the branch and it stays there, and you take it over to the can and you release it. So I had one of those. I had one in my car, cut and hold and drop. So my favorite is ARS. In terms of hand pruners, again, the ARS brand is my favorite. And the reason, I don't think I wrote it in. The reason I like it is you're going to replace all the parts. If the spring breaks, you can buy a new spring for it. If one of the cutting blades breaks, you can buy a replacement. But actually, ARS makes about 10 different hand pruning tools. And things to consider are they have right hand and left hand. They have small ones for small ladies' hands and large secateurs, like my French secateurs, large pruners for large hands. So you can buy one, that's fine. The reason I like the one I didn't bring in is it has a rotating handle. So as you pull it, the handle rotates and it's a lot easier on your hand. You don't get as tired doing it.
Do you have one that you recommend for larger diameter cuts?
For larger diameter cuts, you get to a point where you don't want to use a hand pruner, you want to use a saw. And here's an example of a saw that I showed you earlier that you get at a woodworking shop. I don't know what brand it is, but this cuts on the pull, not on the push like American saws do. You can never get a pruner in there. I don't know if you can see how smooth that cut is. It's very smooth, which means it will heal nicely. So you can't always get a pruner in. For example, you can't get that in. I can't use my concave cutter. If I use my concave cutter, it still leaves a little stub.
And where's your concave cutter from, Arnie? Or what do you prefer? Where do you get that?
Usually get it in a nursery that sells bonsai supplies. If you live in the San Francisco Bay Area, Yamagami and Cupertino carries them. And they come in different sizes depending on your hand size. And what I like about it is if you hold it up to the light, no light comes through, which means you'll get a really nice cut. And it's so easy to sharpen. And I want to sharpen it. You can even take a nail file and just this. And it's sharpened. Say Al.
Yeah, it's pretty sharp.
Yeah. And the same is true, repeating myself because I can't overemphasize how much easier it is when you're pruning to keep your tools sharp. So with your pruners, if you're right-handed, you hold it like this and take, I usually carry a sharpening stone with me that I like. And I take the stone just do this at about 20-degree angle. And then the opposite side, any glue that I might have picked up today. And go back to 98 cents. I want to show you, I have a crummy pruner. Yeah, look at this old rusty one. Look what happens when don't embarrass me. Look what happens when you don't have a sharp tool. Here's your test. I want you all going out to your garage. I'll wait 5 minutes and go ahead and get your pruners.
Make sure it's just $1 bill.
And demonstrate how well you can fold the $1 bill if you're in the US instead of cutting it. Now, don't embarrass me. Please don't embarrass me.
How often do you sharpen the pruners, Arnie?
After every job, I sterilize with Lyngso my pruners. And then when I get to the job, I'll sharpen them. You can tell it's sharp. Do I see? I don't see any light coming through, so I don't know what the heck's going on there. Look, hey, everybody see that? Look, it did cut, didn't it? See? So, sharpening stone you buy at the hardware store. Nail file you borrow from your wife. Want to go first class, and you get one of these that have the diamond beads on it. Pretty good, huh? Fine and smooth, of course. Or a regular file.
Arnie, I'm not sure if you're going to address this, but do you know how to prune grapevines, perhaps? I'm not sure if this is the right class for it, but there were.
Not really, that's a whole different genre.
That's what I figured.
But it makes me think of something. The one plant we didn't mention is a wisteria. And the wisteria is a weird thing to plant. A little plant dilemma. When you prune a wisteria, you never cut it flush, you always leave a stub. Because if you don't leave a stub, it dies back and kills the whole branch. So that reminds me, when you say green pruning, and wisteria pruning. Here's a good gadget. If you really think you have all the tools in the world, you don't have this. I bought that in Mexico. This cuts the stem of the piece of fruit without damaging the fruit. Isn't that cute?
That's pretty nice. It has a little hook.
It doesn't have a point, so you're not going to poke a hole in the piece of fruit. You don't have to twist it and break a branch. You can cut that beautiful apple and bring it in for a room in the air. There is a ARS brand saw that is similar to this carpenter shop saw.
What's that harvest pruner called, Arnie? Or the fruit pruner? Is there?
I wish I knew. I don't remember. I bought it in Cabo San Lucas. So what else do we have to share in my toolbox?
Someone's asking if they can use thymol as a disinfectant, then wipe off excess paper towel. It's a surface cleaner used during COVID. Can you use the same thing for cleaning pruners and tools?
As a repeat. Wow. When I do grafting, I thought I was so smart that I took the piece of wood, which is a scion, and sprayed it with Lysol to kill all the germs on it, and then attached it to the roots, and never worked. Because the Lysol spray killed all the cells at the end of it. So if you want to spray with Lysol, that's fine, but don't use the Lysol wet. If you cut a diseased branch off, and then you should spray it with Lysol before you go to another branch, wipe the Lysol off because you'll do some damage. On the other hand, well, I didn't tell everybody I'm 95% protected. I got both shots, so no one should worry. Okay, people worry. Anyhow, alcohol. When you go and get your coronavirus vaccine, they rub down the injection area. They're rubbing it down to clean it and to sterilize it. But it's not sterile until the alcohol has totally evaporated dry, bone dry. So the analogy is if you're going to sterilize your tools with alcohol, they need to be dry, or you'll have the same dilemma. When you cut, you'll kill the cells maybe where you don't want to kill them. In fruit orchards where they do mass production type of pruning, what they do is they mix 1 part of Clorox to 10 parts of water in a bucket. And they cut and dip and cut and dip and cut and dip. So they don't want to do an analysis like we're doing and try to find out what disease it might have. That'll show up later. The important thing is to get it down to size. The big thing right now is to minimize the cost of workman's compensation insurance. So if this was a fruit orchard, they would prune the trees all this height. So nobody has to use an orchard ladder anymore to prune the fruit if it's a hand picking operation. If it's machine picking, that's a whole different story. But that might be true in your garden too. Remember, fruit trees come in dwarfs, intermediate size, and standard. And why don't you just put in dwarfs or put in 2-on-1 where you have 2 different ones growing out of the same pot instead of having to go up on the ladder. How much fruit can you eat? You're ending up giving it all away to your friends anyhow. So be selfish and safe and just put in dwarf trees. With an Acer palmetto, with a Japanese maple, there's only a dwarf or a standard. You don't have an intermediate size. So the biggest problem I seem to run into in pruning residences, people planting standard trees too close to the house. That is so common. And we end up with this. Look. And I have it in my house too. And I was going to cut it down, and a more knowledgeable friend of ours who could spell horticulture before I could, he said, leave it. And now we have the most beautiful weeping Japanese maple. And I was going to cut it down. I didn't. So
we've got about 8 more minutes. I know we've got some questions that you wanted to address before
sure.
The end here.
Pruning cherry trees, I would prune cherry trees after I pick the fruit. That's a quick answer. I didn't use up 8 minutes. Okay, we have a serious problem with cherries in this area all being invaded by insects. Prune old trees, namely apricot, plum, and apple. Our neighbor has a very old apple tree that's almost as old as she is, that her grandmother put in, and it was becoming less and less productive, less fruit, more and more branches dying. So what we decided to do was to give it a new birth. So we bought a disease-resistant rootstock tree. And I did, had just a single trunk on it. And I did what's called an omega graft off the top of a branch of grandma's apple tree. And now grandma is reborn. So if you do a top graft, omega graft is a tool. And this is the top of your tree trunk. And with this tool, it punches like this. Look how much more surface you get than this straight across. So the piece that we attached, which is called the scion, has the same diameter and the same fit. And the two go together like a crossword puzzle. But you have so much more surface to connect that it's a much better way to connect. So with an old apple tree, unless it has sentimental value, I say it's time for it to go. If it has sentimental value, you might get the neighborhood grafting expert to take part of grandma's tree and graft it on new rootstock.
Fair enough.
Okay. You got time for one more question?
Yeah, we've got about 5 more minutes.
Okay. I think the hardest thing to do is deciding how much of a fruit tree you can prune away. And again, the most generous is the pear and the apple. With everything else, they need their leaves to produce good fruit, so you should really do minimal pruning. For example, I've always been told, switching to a Japanese maple, you should not prune more than 20% of it because it needs its leaves to shelter it for the summer. And it won't have enough leaves and it'll get sun scorched, not sunburned. The right word is sun scorched. The bark turns white. While fruit trees are more generous, you can prune away a lot more on that. So if we don't have any further questions, then
Right.
why don't we thank everybody for attending?
Okay, I think that's, unless anyone has any pressing questions that we haven't addressed, we've got 3 minutes. If not, we'll be concluding very shortly. I don't think there are any incoming questions coming in, but, and again, I'm gonna email out the link, and this will be posted under our community resources on our website as well.
Did you research a name on that moisture meter?
I did, yeah, and I sent it via chat. So
Okay.
they've got it there,
Okay.
so.
Yeah, don't guess on watering. Yes, it costs $60, $70, $80. You take care of it and it'll last a lifetime. And you don't have to guess, did I water it enough? Is my drip irrigation working? You don't have to guess. This is a very informative device. I don't get any commission.
I mean, you don't have a code?
No code.
None of the influencer
Okay.
codes?
But if you buy two, you get a free pillow.
All righty, well, with that note, thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the talk, and it'll be on our community resources.